Here's how to use the settings menu in the latest version of Archform. So to go to the settings menu, we go to the upper left side right here where it says settings. And now we are given a list of the different categories of settings, and so I will go through these one at a time. So the first one that we have is account. This is basically just for logging out. Say you have a different account that you want to go to, you can just press this log out button right here. There's not much here on the account, so we'll go on to general. So in the general settings, this is where you can change your dental notation. So this is, for example, if you want to move from, ISO, change it to Universal or Palmer, whatever you use in your office, this is how you can do that. So the next one has to do with the axis of the tooth. So if we go back here on a tooth, you can see that this axis generally follows the long axis of the tooth and hopefully goes in the direction of the root. If I change this from advanced to vertical axis locked, this would basically make the long axis of the tooth always point straight up and down from a global coordinate system standpoint. I would say 99% of people want to be on advanced. There's a few people that want to be on the other. So I guess if you're one of those, this is how you change it, but everyone else should have it on advanced. Next, we have an option here that says reset gum morphing. So this is basically if you are inside of Archform and the gums are looking really messed up, maybe you think that there's a problem with the software, it's a good first idea to just open up the settings and click reset gum morphing. And if there's a bug with the gum morphing or if it did it wrong, you can press this again and it will do a complete reset of how it has morphed the gums. The next option is the reset stage number object. So these numbers right here are the stage number objects. And let's say that on this tooth we had drug it way up here in the gums and we could no longer get it back. There was no way to click it to bring it back and we wanted to retrieve that. That is when we would open up the settings and click reset stage number object. It'll ask us, do we want to do that? I'm going to say yes. And now you can see that we pulled it out and we can just click on these numbers, drag them back to where they should be. And now we've solved that problem. So now I'll continue on. The next option is that we can change the background color. So you can choose a variety of colors. Some people have said that this color is a little bit too light, especially when you're just looking at the upper or lower, just with the teeth right against the background. It's not quite high enough contrast, so you can easily change that. And now you've solved that problem. And we will be updating these colors as we go, but you can choose whatever color you find easiest on your eyes. So the next thing is the staging menu. This is where you can choose how far a tooth moves in every single aligner. And so we have it set as a default to zero point 0.2 for all of the regular translation movements, 0.15 for intrusion and extrusion, 2 degrees of rotation for tipping and rotation, and then 1 degree for torque. But you can set this however you want. Some people are experimenting with different sorts of materials that maybe are a little bit softer and can handle higher amounts of tooth movement. Other people are slowing down tooth movement for maybe a patient that's a little bit older and you think the teeth aren't going to move as fast. This is where you can adjust that. And if you ever get, off and you don't remember what the defaults were, you can just press the reset to default button. So the next option is called separated computation of stages for upper and lower. And that's kind of a long way of saying basically, do you want the exact same number of stages on the upper and the lower? So right here, you can see that we've gone up to about stage 9, and now the upper teeth no longer have to do any movement, and it's just the lower teeth moving. And so that is with this button checked. If I uncheck this button, you can see that now it has slowed down the teeth on the opposing jaw. And so we have just the same number of stages upper and lower. One side effect of this is that some people with slower computers, it takes less processing time to leave this unchecked. So if you have a really slow computer, you should leave this unchecked until you're ready to export. The next one is always prompt to choose staging parameters. This is a setting that's really important for people that are, handling a large volume of cases and need to make sure that the staging parameters are always set correctly. If you're just a regular user, I recommend that you leave this unchecked. The next option in the settings is the default pivot position. So right now, when you click on a tooth, it automatically defaults to the center of the crown. We have different pivot options where you can move a tooth from the incisal edge, or you can move it from up here on the root, what we call the center of resistance. So back in the settings, you can choose where you want it to automatically pivot from. So most of the time it is defaulted to the center of the crown, but if you're trying to basically move the teeth in a way that includes more tipping or includes less movement of the center of resistance, oftentimes setting it to the center of resistance as your default pivot position makes more sense. So I'm going to move that back to the center of the crown. Next, we have the view options, and we have two options here. One is unconstrained rotation. So when I enable that, I'm able to move the teeth to any direction. So I can view it, kind of upside down and to the side, and I can just view it really in any direction. The main reason people like this is that they can go upside down or they can go at, odd angles. Some people really like this, and some people are really confused by this view. So that is up to you which one you choose. The next option is auto center on tooth. When this is selected, you can see that when we click a tooth, that is moved to the center of the screen now. So basically, if I click this tooth over here, now that is moved to the center of the screen. I will default this to the off position. Finally, we come to the export options. So this is a new option. We have preset options where basically you can have a set of settings and it will default them all to a series of settings here. This is probably not that useful if you're just an individual office, but if you're doing huge volumes, this is really, really useful to make sure, 50 computers or something like that are all on the same settings. So most of the time you can ignore this option. Next, we choose if we want to print the models vertically or horizontally. Uh, Normally I default to vertical print, and then we can choose at what angle the model is printed. Basically, if you print a vertical model just straight up and down, you'll have an increased likelihood of print failures. So if you tilt it back just slightly, the prints come out far more reliable. The default should be about 15 degrees, although it depends on the type of printer that you have and how experimental you want to get. So the next option is basically if we want to hollow out the gums. We specifically say hollow out the gums because we do not hollow out the teeth because that can lead to more print failures. So my favorite setting is hollow gums with 3D infill, where we can basically put a honeycomb structure inside of the hollow models. This gives us many of the advantages of the hollow, but also keeps extra rigidity and extra support so we have less print failures. You can also choose the type of infill. So hexagonal is like a honeycomb structure. You can also put triangular or rectangular. Um, there's no real clear advantage to any one of these. I think hexagonal probably saves the most amount of material, but the others are options there, and different people have different preferences for that. So the next thing is where we want to put the patient name on the model. So basically we have a few options. One is that we can just turn the label off altogether. The next is that we can put the label on the bottom, but this is only possible if you have a solid print. As you can see, if I choose to put the label on the bottom of the model, we've got some error messages or some warning messages coming up here. And so the default is normally labeling it on the side of the model. And so you can choose which side of the model you want it on. You can default it to, the outside left, but you can also put it on the lingual side on the right or the left as well. Next, you can choose whether you want to export in the STL or OBJ format. Most of the time STL is fine, but there are certain printers where OBJ is preferable. So if you don't know which one to choose, just choose STL, but it doesn't really make a big difference which one you choose. Next, we have the auto packing. So there are 3 different options here. Auto packing basically will move all of your models into a single STL file so that you'll be able to just click and drag that single STL file into your printer and press print, and you won't have to lay out all the models, because I know that's kind of a pain to do. So we default to no auto packing, but then we have 2 separate options, and so many people are kind of confused. They're like, what does combined mean? What does separated mean? So the difference is that with combined, we never split a stage across 2 different build platforms. So for example, if you have stage number 5 and that has an upper and a lower, you would potentially not want stage 5 to be split between print number 1 and print number 2. And so combine will always keep a stage, the upper and lower for that stage, in the same build platform. But as a result of that, you sometimes may be able to fit another model into that build platform. And so you'll have like slightly lower print density. And so if you choose separated, that is going to pack the build platform to its maximum density every single time, but may separate a single stage across 2 prints. Next, when this is turned on, we can choose what kind of printer we have. We have a pretty comprehensive library of the most popular printers amongst our customers. If you have a printer that is not on here, just let us know and help us get the build platform size, and we can easily add that in here for your specific kind of printer. And the next option is upward direction. Different print softwares and other softwares downstream of Archform have different default up axes. So basically, some people say y-axis is up and some people say z-axis is up. So we put that in here as a setting, and that's super helpful if you have a printer and every time you import the model's at 90 degrees to where it should be. This is how you can adjust that so it works seamlessly with the printer software or whatever software you're using after you export from Archform. So now we have a few more options. We have the export stage number. So the stage number is back to these numbers that are here on the molars. And so you can choose whether you want to export those or not. The next option is the start stage number. So the reason we built this feature was that some of our users were really wanting to have refinement numbers that continued on from the last stage. So basically, when you deliver your aligners to a patient, sometimes, say they've gone through 15 stages and you want to start the refinement as stage number 16, this is how you can do it. You just type in number 16 here, and now the very first stage that you export will be stage 16. But you should default that to 0. And it's important that that is defaulted to 0 instead of 1, because if it's 1, basically all of your aligners will be greater by 1 than you would naturally expect. So the next option is if we export the initial stage. So the initial stage is the bonding template. And so you can choose, do you want to export stage 0 or do you not want to export stage 0? The next option is our export retainer option. So retainer basically exports a duplicate of our final stage, and it does that without attachments. And so basically you can say, hey, I know I'm going to make a retainer at the end of this stage, and I would like to have it without attachments, but I don't want to turn off all the attachments and export it a second time. You just make this check marks, and now you have a retainer file ready to print. So the next option is export aligner objects. This is a complicated way of saying basically cutouts and hooks. Do you want to export a raised surface wherever you have added cutouts and hooks? The reason we have these is because it is a really effective way to communicate to whoever is making the aligners exactly where to make a cutout and a hook. So the next one is auto gap filling. So gap filling is different than blockout. Gap filling is basically if we have a tooth that is extracted, I'll come out here and extract a tooth. Basically, it will put a ridge in between these two teeth, and that helps keep the aligner more rigid, and it's going to be able to transfer the forces along the arch much better, and it's also going to keep that thermoplastic material away from touching the gums. Another way that you can solve this is the Pontics, but that's a different feature. So the next option is auto blockout. So auto blockout basically fills in deep concavities. So blockout sometimes is defined as like how much overhang there is from a given insertion angle or something like that, much like the kind of blockout that you would see with a splint or something like that. This is not that kind of blockout. Basically, this blockout is going to fill in areas like in between teeth where you have lots of recession, or basically anywhere that you have like an abrupt concave area. It's just going to fill that in. So this is really helpful for patients with recession, and if you're worried about will the patient be able to get the aligner out and in easily enough, this is where you can add that. But only leave this checked for patients that actually need it. The reason is nothing complicated. It's just it takes a lot of computation time on your computer. So if you leave this on, your export times are going to be really, really slow. And then we have this associated option here, which is the amount of offset. So this is basically how much offset is being added. And we default it to 0.2. 0.2 you could basically turn on for every single patient, but I just told you not to do that. So if you really need blockout, I would suggest that you move this to 0.3 or 0.4 and just export it and see how much blockout is added. If it doesn't look like enough blockout, then come back here, change this number, and export it again. So the next option that we have is the auto cutting plane. So what the auto cutting plane does is when we have a model here, we can choose how far on average from the edge of the tooth down to the bottom of the model. And so obviously we can set this manually, but we can also use this button that says auto cutting plane, and then it will automatically put these cutting planes in a way that optimizes for whatever number that we've set. So right now I have set it for 2 millimeters away from the edge of the model. It's very roughly 2 millimeters, but it biases towards like being about a millimeter more than you say here. So if you type in 1 millimeter, you'll get something closer to 2. We just sort of noticed this afterwards, and I think the reason is that it's taking into account the roots underneath the tooth that you can't really see, and so that's why there's essentially an additional 1 millimeter offset. And one of the reasons this feature is so important is so that you can have a consistent model height, and the model height actually impacts the thickness of the thermoformed plastic. And so by making this automated, we were able to achieve a more uniform aligner, thermoformed aligner thickness. So that's why, even though this sounds like kind of an extra feature, it actually can have clinical implications. So the next option is for users that are using either the Archmill automated aligner trimming robot or are ordering aligners from us and manually setting the trim path. So this is basically a setting for how far away the trim path is defaulted away from the edge of the gums. So if I come here to aligner and it wants to generate a trim path for me, and I've got my offset over here, it will default to pulling the offset from the settings. And then it will pull that in. So that is all the settings inside of Archform. And I hope that's very helpful and hope it's not too complex. If it's too complex, just reach out and we will be happy to help you one-on-one.